Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today we have an extremely special guest, Patrick Cassidy, a master of Aikido and a pioneer in integrating mindfulness with martial art. I am really excited for today's conversation. Our guest today joins us for this insightful journey into the philosophy and practice of this art of peace. With decades of training and teaching around the globe, Patrick shares how Aikido transcends the dojo, offering lessons for resilience, connection, and living with intention. In this episode, we explore the transformative power of aligning mind, body, and spirit, and how the principles of Aikido can inspire a more compassionate and balanced approach to education and life. How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited for today's conversation. This season has been talking to all the guests that I, was so lucky to be able to meet at the Kaleido conference. Truly a very special time. We were just briefly talking right now that it took us, thousands of miles to end up meeting, even though we both grew up in California,
Exactly.
which is so special. But I want to first maybe just start a little bit, getting to know who you are and how you found Aikido and kind of your journey. And so you grew up in California, and what was it like? You said near Bakersfield.
Well, it was actually near closer to Fresno and a town called Reedley. And I was both my parents were teachers, were educators, and so I grew up with an inclination to read a lot, and the Japanese community actually in California is quite strong in that area, and so there was a very very popular, well attended judo club in our town. And I had started training in martial arts at that club when I was 7 years old, and it was something that I had enjoyed quite a bit. And I went back and forth and continued through high school back and forth, and it wasn't until I got to university, and I attended university in the central coast of California in a town called San Luis Obispo, that I had found Aikido, and I was doing a period of contemplation about, in university, really kind of assessing who am I and where do I want to go and what exactly do I want to do. And I had been studying aeronautical engineering with the intention of hopefully entering into the space program. And as I had continued my studies and I started to realize that program led into the military, that to make it to the space program, that generally most people went through military training or some form of working with the military in the aerospace realm or part of how people engage in business, that they would go through, to get to the space program, they would go through some form of military contractual training or contractual work. And I didn't necessarily want to work for the military, so I started having kind of an existential crisis with regards to who I was and what I wanted to do. And after about 3 years of university, I'd been doing a lot of yoga and had started Aikido because I had wanted to do something more comprehensive and something that kind of addressed all the different components of who I am as a human being. And so that practice was very intriguing. I had found a good teacher, and it was very small classes. And again, I was doing yoga, and it also had started meditation at that time on a more regular basis. And I had taken a class on death and dying in the university, and I had been reading actually a lot of Carlos Castaneda. I don't know if you're familiar with that author, but he had mentioned, in his storytelling about his time with Don Juan, his mentor and his guide, the stories came out that of how we relate to death. How do we relate to our own mortality? And to find inspiration from facing our mortality and facing the fact that we live a life that is limited, and we don't know how long we have the opportunity to spend here. So I took that very much to heart, and I took that seriously. So I had asked myself the question: if I had 1 year left to live, what would I do? And the first response came up: I would actually leave university and move to Japan to train in Aikido, and then move on to India to explore yoga and meditation. And so I sat with that quite seriously and made the decision to follow that impulse. And so 6 months later, I left university after 3.5 years of being there, and traveled to Japan. And I spent 2 months as a live-in student in the dojo that the founder had created, the founder of Aikido, and had such a powerful experience that I decided to commit my whole life to the path. And so I make it a habit to ask myself the question every year: if I have 1 year left to live, what do I do? And this is how I've guided my life so far, and it seems to have been very supportive and very a good framework on how to make life decisions with regards to where to go and what to commit to. So right now it's been 41 years of exploring this and in this fashion, and I find I'm in the right place at the right time. So it's somehow I've been able to use that question to guide me in making the decisions that support what feels like an authentic path for my life. And Aikido has been a big central theme to that, and been very powerful in being able to kind of be a process of transformation and awakening, and if we maybe even go so far as to say personal evolution.
So you said you left Cal Poly 3.5 years in. Did you graduate, or did you
No,
left before you graduated? Oh wow!
Yeah, I left.
So you full committed. You're like the Steve Jobs of Aikido.
Yeah, well, no, I'm not quite sure if I would say that, but I mean, I had accessed, I had just given everything to that question. And so it didn't, there were other ways of kind of saying, well, to try to negotiate it. Well, I'll finish my degree, and then maybe later on I'll do a short trip here, and I'll do that, and I'll do this, and I'll do that. But it didn't seem to be completely satisfying by, kind of negotiating or bargaining with that impulse that said, hey, if you're going to do it, then let's do it. Let's not waste any time.
I've been having kind of this dilemma also with my life right now. I mean, I am in Japan, but there is a large part of me that always has this hold on, like, can I navigate one foot in the corporate kind of path that maybe I might, I always want to have one foot in the door and one foot out, where I'm like, and I think I'm getting to the point now where by living like that, I'm doing a disservice to both halves of what I'm trying to do with my life. And sometimes it is truly by committing to a decision that you take that you can actually allow yourself to thrive in that path. And I think, what was that journey like for you? Because I think that can be so challenging, because the immediate first couple weeks, the only thought is, did I make the right decision? How am I, will I be able to go back? Did I screw up? Do you remember the kind of transformation and transition that took you from a place of doubt into a place of, okay, I think this is right?
Well, actually, I mean, it's funny you asked that. I had gone my first trip for 2 months, and at the end of the visit, I wrote myself a letter. And I had written myself a letter, and I said, and I expressed all the different insights and the things that I felt had changed, in that short period of time. And at the end of the letter, I wrote, and don't forget, you have to come back and get me. And I was writing to the part of me that was going to be going back. And I was writing from the part of me that had gone through that transformation. So from the transformed me, or that short period of transformation that I had tasted, was writing to the person I was going to be in the future after going back. And so what had happened was I got back, and sure enough, after a couple of months, I started to think, okay, how do I go back into the mainstream? And so I had actually applied to a different university in Santa Cruz, and I was thinking I would go into psychophysiology, which was basically the university study of the mind-body relationship. And I thought, okay, this is a good kind of parallel studies that will help me with pursuing my understanding of Aikido in more of a formal form. And it was kind of my way of bargaining. And I had gone through that, and it was about 5 months in, and I was preparing. It was like December, and the university classes were going to start in April. And I found that letter, and I opened the letter, and I realized what I had done, and I canceled my university, and I went back to Japan immediately.
And then you lived there for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And then 7.
So I decided, so I had gotten to a place where I was studying Aikido, and I was so much in love with it that I instead of trying to go back and forth and try to, at the beginning of my stay, I would write notes down on every class I took, and I would try to remember. And then I said, stop. I'm going to stop trying to remember. I'm just going to take as long as I need to go until I get it into my bones. Until I get it into my system where I don't need to remember it anymore. It's just part of who I am. And so then I just took my time. I trained very hard, and I trained regularly, and oftentimes twice a day. And at first lived in the dojo as a live-in student, then moved to a small apartment very close by to the dojo. And there was a community of expats from all over the world who had done something similar. There was a guy from England, New Zealand, and Sweden, and we had another American who came later, and we had all created a community where we supported each other in sustaining our livelihood. So we found a lot of work teaching English, and by teaching English, it became very easy to make enough money where you could take care of your daily needs, even save up a little bit of money, and be able to train as often as you like. So, working from 10 to 15 hours a week, which is very little. So, and we could schedule ourselves as we like. So it ended up being extraordinarily just a perfect moment to be in Japan at that time. So it also gave me the opportunity to study other things. I developed a relationship with a brilliant yoga teacher who was in Tokyo. I also studied Japanese tea ceremony regularly with a brilliant teacher in a nearby city known as Mito. And so I gave myself totally to the process and created a life there. And that lasted for quite some time. And it was just the ability to completely give myself to the things I was in love with, and finding ways of being able to support that life. I was just very lucky, and it was just a very good time to be there. So, yeah.
So, one thing I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about is, before moving into what that journey was more like, I want to understand first what exactly Aikido is, and how, when you first started, did you differentiate the lessons that had taught you from maybe doing karate or judo or Thai? How did you What is the difference and how did you choose?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think to a large extent the Aikido community right now is a little bit struggling with that question, because Aikido is a very powerful martial art. It's very capable in many different ways, especially the way we trained in Japan, and it was a very kind of hard knock school. But what I think most people in the world of Aikido find themselves drawn to are the writings of the founder of Aikido, who's referred to as O-sensei. His name was Morie Ueshiba. And he was born, in the late 1800s and, ended his life in 1960, late 1960s. And he had an enlightened perspective on life. He was definitely somebody that had touched upon a universal perspective of who he was and his relationship to the world around him. And that's evident in his writings. They're very inspired, and they're very transcendent to a certain degree. And he saw Aikido as being an expression of that enlightened perspective. And I don't think that's necessarily how he envisioned Aikido when it first started out, but in his expression, in specifically right after World War II, his expression of Aikido was an art of love, or an art of unification, and it's it's such a different take when you apply, and Aikido has that capacity to express that. It can be a devastating and very brutal martial art if it were to be trained in that way. But it can also be a way of fundamentally relating to conflict from a place of we rather than I. So that I'm relating to violence, I'm relating to aggression as more as an energy that I need to fundamentally kind of frame and guide and be able to bring to a peaceful resolution, rather than seeing the other person as somebody that I need to destroy. And so rather than seeing the other person as being the enemy, Aikido offers this possibility of actually looking at aggression itself, violence itself, and the impulse for violence as being the root cause. And that's what I'm fundamentally addressing. And so that means you address it not only within the other person, you address it within yourself. And the movements within Aikido carry the potential of being able to kind of handle that aggression in such a way that you're able to guide it and to move with it, to allow it to become expressed powerfully, but not in a way where the other person has to become destroyed or traumatized in order for that expression to occur. So you're expressing power that doesn't necessarily destroy the other person, but it does deal with the conflict. And that's a very interesting form of power to explore, because it allows for that recognition that we are connected to be sustained. And that as I respond to conflict, I'm not just only protecting myself, I'm also I'm honoring the relationship that I have with the other person. And that, I think, to a certain extent is, it's my take on the perspective that O-sensei was trying to share, that we fundamentally exist in a field of consciousness, in a life which is not separate from each other. And how do we deal with conflict when that arises in relationship to another person? That I recognize I'm not separate from this other person, but conflict is conflict, and I have to deal with it. And so, how do I bridge that gap? And there's an image that O-sensei referred to, that he stands on the bridge between heaven and earth, in the sense, and the way I process that metaphor or that image, is that you have one foot deeply in that understanding and that realization that we are not separate, that we are one, and that the world is fundamentally one. And then you have another foot which is firmly connected with the day-to-day reality of conflict and violence and the obvious challenges that go with navigating life and having to deal with people who may not recognize this unity in life and are fundamentally expressing a great degree of violence or aggression or separation in their behavior. So the metaphor I use is for myself is to imagine that if every human being was if the planet Earth and all humanity was one global brain, and every human being in that brain was a neuron in that brain, and you're a neuron in that brain, and you recognize you belong to a larger brain. You belong to something larger which contains us all. Other neurons may not understand that, and other neurons may express violence or aggression towards you. Now, how do you respond in such a way that you honor yourself, but you also honor the fact that you share this brain with the other person? And how do you navigate that? And that, for me, is what Aikido pierced and showed the possibility of how to be empowered in a unified state and deal with those violent tendencies that still exist, even though you recognize there's no separation between you and the other person. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it wouldn't have made sense. I think it would have been very abstract, but because I was able to experience the one kind of showing that you had done at Kaleido, which I'll maybe quickly explain for the listeners, because I found it to be so helpful in so many aspects of my life now, and I still reflect on that all the time. So we had done this practice where there was two of us. It would be you and a partner who were standing across from you. And the partner would put their hands on your chest and start leaning into your body. And naturally, the very first time, as someone put more and more pressure on my chest, I eventually fell backwards. And I was like, all right, well, that's a lot of pressure. What am I supposed to do? And you had presented this other perspective, which was rather than imagining that the force is actually being exerted at the point where their hand touches your chest, imagine that their hand and their arm is actually a part of your body, and the force is actually coming from their shoulder, and just have that visual in your head. And now it seems like, if someone was to just say this to me, it wouldn't sound like it makes sense. It's probably something else. But when you really experienced the difference that perspective shift made, where you could withhold way more strength. It was just, I was able to, they could push far harder and I was not moving at all. And that connected into this concept for me that really struck profoundly, which was this idea that where you identify the conflict to happen, when it's really close to you, it can sometimes feel that much greater than when you're able to kind of become one with whatever it is that is causing you tension or strain in the moment. So I've recently been trying to do this so much with my feelings of fear or my feelings of stress, rather than looking at it as some like enemy. I'm like, okay, what is this pointing me towards? What is this signal? Like thinking about it as part of me. And that connects, I think, in a lot of ways to what that exercise also did. But would you like to expand a bit more on the exercise? Because I really felt like that was really helpful to understand a bit of what you're saying right now.
Well, your description of the exercise is well done. And fundamentally, the idea is to actually experience the pressure as being something that I include rather than something that I fight. So as I feel back into it and I connect with the person who's applying that pressure, and I feel that arm as if it were an extension of myself, and I can go back not just only into the shoulder, but I can feel back in all the way into the back and into the foot if you go deeply enough. Then suddenly the pressure is not a problem. The pressure is part of isn't part of the system. And then the system doesn't set itself up to fight it sets itself up to include, which then experiences itself in a much more powerful state of being. But I like the fact that you mentioned, how that can potentially change our relationship to fear, and that's a big theme of the work that I do with as a coach, because I'm also I am an executive coach, and I work with a lot of people who aren't necessarily capable of or have the time to practice Aikido, but want to look into these themes more personally, more directly. And I do a metaphor, kind of a visualization, to help explain what it might be to change our relationship to fear itself. So if you imagined yourself traveling or walking across the street, and let's say you're walking across the street with somebody you love, a child or an aunt or a grandmother, or somebody who's frail and can't necessarily care for themselves. And as you walk across the street with this person that you're caring for, a car shows up and is barreling down on you. And you're going to get hit. That's quite clear. So out of nowhere, this energy shows up and you grab the person that you're with and you move in such a way that you avoid getting hit by the car and you protect the other person at the same time. And the movement that you do is extraordinary. It's like, Olympic style, Olympic quality movement. And if somebody were to take a video of you, it would be very impressive. And maybe you've already had this experience, and I have had this experience many times, but you can also find it on social media. There are lots of videos of people doing extraordinary things to care for someone who's about to get hit or injured or in some way harmed. And their bodies respond in fantastically appropriate and incredibly accurate and tremendously powerful ways of movement that they have not been trained to do, but somehow that's been released through their nervous system and through the immediacy of the situation. So let's say you have a moment like this. Let's say you have an experience like this. And it all comes from the intelligence of the body. All of it flows from the core of yourself. So then the next day you go back and you're with a friend and you go back to the same road and you're standing on the road and you're about to cross the road and your mind projects the car that almost hit you yesterday. And so this intelligence starts to show up again, right? It starts to percolate. Because the image in the mind immediately communicates to that intelligence, you've got to respond. So you're sitting there and you start to shake. Because you don't have because there is no car. It's only an image. So there's nowhere for this energy, this intelligence to function or to express itself. And so it kind of overloads the system and you start to shake. You don't know what to do exactly because this energy has no place to express itself. And your friend says, "What's wrong?" And you say, "Well, yesterday I almost got hit by a car, saved my child or saved my grandmother. And now I'm remembering that and my body's starting to shake." And he says, "Oh, you're afraid." And you say, "Oh, is that what this is?" And you say, "Yeah, that's fear." And don't be afraid. Just let it go. Just ignore it. There's nothing to be afraid of. Just drop it. And so we start to create a relationship with that energy, which functions so powerfully before as being adversarial, something that inhibits us from being able to respond. Because we are now projecting the image of the car rather than relating to the actuality of the car itself. So we create this kind of relationship to that energy, which normally shows up in times of emergency as being something as a liability. And we don't recognize that actually it was an ally. The day before it saved your life. And now it seems to be something that's inhibiting you from being able to behave. So what happens when we start to relate to our own intelligence, our own physical intelligence, our own somatic intelligence, as being something problematic, and that we kind of divorce ourselves from our own life force, and we call that fear, we call that anxiety, we call that whatever emotion that you feel that you might be experiencing, or that energy charge, and we don't benefit from its presence. So by changing our relationship to that can actually start to allow that somatic intelligence to function in ways that are supportive of the system, if I give it space to do so. Rather than moving in relationship to because there's no car. If there's no car and I'm just projecting, then allowing that energy to flow in and ground me deeper and open me up in a larger state, and being able to address reality in a more profound way. This energy can be given a status as an ally, or as something that is an asset. And I can benefit from its intelligence rather than separate from it as being an uncomfortable experience that I call fear. Do you understand it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, so I have a question for you, because this is something that I personally have. I used to be a very, very fearful person, and it's taken a lot of years to really sit with this feeling and not to antagonize it and understand where it's coming from, why it exists. And slowly I've really changed my relationship with it. But the one that I've been having a hard time finding the right perspective around is because with fear, I think it makes sense. It theoretically makes sense what the purpose of it is. The one that's harder for me to feel is like shame. Shame doesn't necessarily make so much sense to me. Why? What like benefit it does? Like, for example, if and the first answer that comes up is like, okay, well, you need to feel shame so that you can modulate your behavior so you can fit in a group. But there are other feelings that also arise, like loneliness, that like play that role of like, let me change my behavior so I can fit in. So then why shame? Like what I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, because that's something that's just been on my mind. I'm just curious if you have some thoughts on that.
I think you're looking at also conditioned behavior too, because we create shame as something that fundamentally comes out of our relationship with the community around us. We feel ashamed because we feel exposed, and we feel exposed in such a way that our community threatens to reject us. And I think there's a lot there to unpack, and but I think that this is also indicative of kind of the dilemma that we found ourselves in the sense that coming back to the intelligence of the body, that we have we have been conditioned to disassociate from that intelligence through the experience of shame. In the sense that if for example, if you were to take the average person, maybe not you personally, but the average person, you drop them into, let's say, a shopping center, completely unclothed, naked, without a stitch on them. Most people are going to run and hide to see if they can find a place where they can get some clothes to cover up, or they're going to feel ashamed by being so vulnerable and so without any clothes in the middle of a public area. And if you didn't feel ashamed, right? If you didn't feel ashamed and you didn't do anything about it, and you just continued with whatever activity you were doing at the time, somebody probably would call the police and take you in for psychological counseling. And so here we are in our society, and we have divorced ourselves from our own bodies so much that actually being at ease in your own skin is something to be ashamed of. where
Mm.
every other living creature on this planet lives at ease and comfortable in their skin. They don't require, there's no, they have no feeling of shame of being in their skin except for human beings. And human beings have lost that contact of just being what I refer to as kind of being in contact with their original state. Where, I mean, there was a time when our ancestors moved without any clothes, or they had no shame for being in their skin. And at that time, their bodies and the seasons were linked so that they could feel the summer, they could feel the winter, they could feel themselves as being part of nature. And we've lost that. We don't feel nature as being part of ourselves. We want to know what the weather is. We look on our phone. We don't feel the seasons unless they encroach upon our living environment. We're, in a way, so disassociated from our own naturalness that to be found in a public place without clothes on would be an experience of shame. And I think the experience of shame in and of itself can be a life supportive experience, in the sense, if you were doing something that you had no idea that was damaging or destructive to another human being, and you suddenly woke up to that fact, you suddenly realized that what you're doing is it's having a negative impact on another human being or another part of the planet. Experiencing that kind of, oh my God, that impact, that feeling of, wow, what, and I think that rises up from basic empathy and the basic sense of how my actions have impact on other people, and how I've inadvertently, for whatever reason, have hurt another human being, or have hurt another, maybe a tree, or maybe a part of the natural world that I live in. And to feel that is a self-regulatory experience. That feeling should help you self-correct. And that in and of itself is a positive thing. But feeling shame in the sense of something like being naked in a public arena is a culturally conditioned experience, and it's a false sense of shame, because it actually is a disassociated state from our own natural being. And so I think it depends on how we're conditioned, and if we're experiencing shame as an empathetic experience of the impact of our actions on the world around us, then, and we wake up to that negative impact, I think it's very positive. To feel shame for some culturally held conditioning, and that we somehow are manipulated by that conditioning to feel inauthentic or separate from who we are, our own sense of self. That's something that I think we can wake up from.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think the crux of what I'm hearing you say when you talk about this like disassociated state is so much of what I really see in education. And I think it's the big thing that I'm so fascinated about. In this conversation, we get to talk about Aikido, but in other conversations, we've talked about it through music or through language. This idea that whatever it is that you're learning is not some abstracted, disconnected thing that's just something to know about, some fact to just know, or something to just memorize. Every piece of knowledge and information can profoundly impact the way that you navigate the world and understand your own experience. When knowledge is looked at through this perspective, you will never step into a chemistry class, a biology class, a health class, a physics class, a math class, where you're just like, all right, I just need to learn this, memorize it for this test, and move on with it. Because you understand how deeply connected it is with you. And I'm curious if for you in your journey, first, if you had this kind of revelation with Aikido where you realized all your training can actually directly impact the way that you live, not only through it being an abstracted way for you to make money, but like the lessons from it itself can be implemented into your life. And then, let's start with that first. Did you always know that, or was there a point in time where you're like, oh, wait, this is connecting to something deeper?
I knew there was a connection to something deeper at the beginning of the journey, but when I moved to Japan, I didn't necessarily see that immediately. In the practice, I saw a lot of Japanese culture and a lot of learning customs and the etiquette and becoming more in tune with the Japanese way of doing things, which was very important in order to be able to function in a Japanese hierarchical situation, and to be able to relate to a teacher and to be able to grow in the framework that the teacher offered. So all of those things were priority, but I realized that that the path I was on was leading to that understanding that you're talking about, that direct experience of the principles of life in such a way that you taste them. You don't necessarily only have a concept of them. You taste them, you feel them at the level of your emotional center, you sense them at the level of your physical center, and you align with these principles. You actually start to express these principles as part of who you are. Rather than conditioned belief structures, you start to align your life with, the quality of listening and the quality of feeling and including and linking with the earth, linking with your environment, and the recognition that your experience, your conscious experience of yourself, is not limited. It's not limited to the story that you've told yourself or the story that you have received from your family, your culture, and your education. It goes far beyond that in a way that you experience yourself without any necessarily defined limits, and your conscious experience becomes the context for your life and the way you meet life as a field of consciousness rather than as separate objects in an unconscious world, and objects that need to be manipulated in order to be able to get what you want. So life becomes much more of an ally, and as an experience of something which is not separate from the own life, from the life that flows through your own body. It's one life. It's not two.
The reason I ask you this question is because I think it can sometimes feel like, as I mentioned earlier, the things that we learn are, like as you said, also two separate things. It's a separate being all on its own, where, if I want to learn about science, it's me understanding the world, not my role as part of the world. How do you think some of the teachings that you do, and also what you've learned and picked up in Aikido, can be transferred over, perhaps in the ways we even think about what teaching or schooling or education can look like, that makes it so that what you learn is so much more embodied and practical?
Well, I use the metaphor of a romantic relationship having two components, and this is also, I think, true for education or becoming, let's say a poet. Okay, you have one dimension where you need to develop, you need to grow, you need to understand, you need to access more information. So in the case of a poet, that would mean learning the vocabulary, learning the grammar, learning the syntax, learning the different ways that language can be combined as a way to lay the context out for how you're going to express poetry. But the other aspect of becoming a poet is a letting go. It's a deep letting go of yourself to yourself in a way of not holding on to the constructs that you've been taught, but allowing yourself to fall into a state of unknowing or not knowing. And through that, the mystery of life starts to show up. You start to experience life as it is, because you realize that in each moment, the unknown nature of what the next moment will be is always there. You don't even know what's going to show up in the next moment, whether it's going to come out even of your own mouth. The whole thing is fundamentally a confrontation with the unknown.
Yeah.
So you drop into that realization, and this then liberates all the information into becoming inspired expression. So that the letting go feeds the education, feeds the words into poetry. So in terms of a romantic relationship, falling in love is a surrender. And if you don't surrender, you don't access that unified state with that other person. It's just you're still in that state of holding or state of protecting or state of controlling until you surrender and you actually drop into that state of love. You really don't feel that. But when you feel that, it changes everything from night to day. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to become a great life partner. Maybe you still have issues with sharing space or taking care of the external responsibilities that go with being a committed person. And maybe to become a good life partner, a good husband, good wife, whatever that may be, requires you to grow up and to develop some skills that enable you to be able to sustain that committed relationship. And that requires practice, that requires change over time, that requires hard work, that requires education, that requires new information. But it's the falling in love which feeds the fire of that development. And so that development, that educational development without love is just information. And but with that love, even if you only know 10 words, you can still write poetry. It's not going to be big poetry, but it can still be authentic. And the more, it's not the amount of words that you know which give you the capacity to write poetry. It's that depth of connection with your own soul that allows for that to occur. But then the education serves that realization.
Serves the realization or serves the aiding in connecting with the soul?
Yeah. Well, that realization that I am a soul and that I've dropped into my soul, I've surrendered to that source of myself and I've connected with the world around me, that the education serves that realization.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I have a few questions. As one, very profound. Two, I don't know which one I want to ask first. Let me start with this one because this is a selfish one that I have.
Sure. I
have been on the edge. I feel like I've been on the edge of letting go for so long now. It started with, it's been a life process for over the last 5 or 6 years of slowly letting go of so many different things. And I feel like I'm on the precipice of I don't know, getting to this place where I'm truly free in some way. But I don't know if you've ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's an amazing show.
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
You've seen a part? Okay.
I've seen some of it.
There's this very important scene in about, I think, season 3, where Aang is given the opportunity to like become his final form. And he lets go of everything. And the last thing he's asked to let go of is Katara, the woman that he loves. And he can't. And he doesn't let go of her. And so he never reaches that final form until he gets hurt or something happens at the end. But it's this idea that there's always the things that are the hardest to let go of seem to be the thing that always holds you back from truly letting go. Because letting go, I think what you said is so beautiful. For education to truly come upon you, you have to let go of like, okay, I'm going to get to this point when I'm 18, at this point at 22, this point at 25, because you don't allow the things to wash through you and
Sure.
move you in whatever direction it does. Because for you to allow, let's say, I don't know, for you to truly experience each class in its fullness, each whatever, I mean, it doesn't even have to be class, any activity, you have to lose yourself to the opportunity that you might just end up doing that for the rest of your life. And you may not, you may not want to do anything else. There's just so many possible outcomes that to surrender yourself to that requires a certain sense of belief and faith that things will work out. And I think this is where I'm hitting a wall, where I'm so close to letting go. But I've never really believed in a God, and I've never really believed in the sense of like things will work out for me because I don't know, God's looking after me or whatever. I never had this belief that things will work out. And so I'm hitting this point where I'm like, if I let go, I have no certainty that things will work out. I'm kind of just letting things naturally take their process, and that could go in any direction, which to me sometimes is terrifying. And so in this process of letting go, especially when we're working in an education setting, what does this process of letting go look like? And what do you do when when you're confronted with the complete loss of control?
So there are two ways to respond to that. And just to address, the statement that you said, I don't have faith that there's a God watching over me and that things are going to work out. And I can understand and appreciate that statement. I think for myself, there is a natural inclination of life to want to increase its experience of itself, its experience and understanding of itself. And that fundamentally functions as the impulse to evolve. And that's been existent since the birth of the universe. And that's not a faith. That's actually fundamentally the path that we have walked since life emerged in the universe until now, where we are an example of life which is conscious of the universe. And I know, this for some people right now, especially in the world around, that I've come across many people who are very cynical and very and in a way very kind of falling into an anti-human perspective, that humans are the problem on the planet, and if we could get rid of humans, then everything would be okay. And that's a little bit like, well, actually that's missing the point. Humans are not foreign to the planet. Humans are part of the universe, and we are fundamentally the first part of the universe that has become conscious of its place in the universe. And I don't think, with as much as I honor and cherish the natural world, I don't see any other life form on this planet who has that capacity to recognize the fact that it is part of this evolving universe to the degree that humans have understood that, and therefore have the responsibility for caring for this planet as well. I think the whole sense, and that is what supports me in the sense that I realize that life itself wants to evolve, and I'm part of that evolving movement. And letting go then can allow for evolution to occur with less strain and a little bit more conscious appreciation. But in terms of letting go, there are a lot of things that you can do to help kind of let go or allow the system to realign itself into a fundamentally more systemic and holistic experience in itself. And anything from breath work to yoga to meditation and to all these different things. But for the letting go that I would offer to you and to people who are in the same position as you feel you're in, is that letting go is not a thing you do. Letting go is something else. And the way I illustrate this is with another metaphor. So imagine that you're in a river and you're holding onto a branch, and the branch is covered with thorns, and it causes a lot of pain for you to hold on to the branch. And you're thinking, if I could just let go of the branch, then the river would take me. I'm not quite sure that the river will support me, but I have hoped that, I'll be able to swim and I'll be part of the flow. If I could just let go, I would be part of the flow. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you go, I don't know how to let go, because every time I let go, I grab it again. And maybe I let go with one hand, but then I grab with the other hand. And the whole process of how do I let go of this branch, which just seems to be where I seem to be suffering. And I want to go into the flow, but I'm afraid of letting go into the flow. And I think that's where a lot of people end up struggling with trying to find ways to let go of this branch, what they feel they know is safety or security. And whether it may be a job, or whether it may be a position in the family, or whether it may be just an idea or a belief structure or a psychological holding pattern, whatever it may be. How can I let this go so I can be part of the flow? And I would put to you that actually the situation is not as you perceive. You are holding on to the stick, and the stick is creating pain and maybe suffering for you. But it's only an illusion. The stick is not connected to the bank. You're already in the river, and you've already been flowing since day one. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. Letting go is not necessarily letting go into the flow. You're already in the flow. Letting go is actually recognizing that that's been the case from day one. And holding on to the stick is only an illusion of security.
So then what is letting go?
Is waking up to that.
Damn. I mean, nice. That's a good metaphor. Metaphors are so helpful. Let me sit on that. I need to sit on that a little bit more. Wow.
It's a different approach. It's a waking up to what is, rather than attempting to change the situation into something else. Now, the education is that changing over time. Learning more information, learning how do I do this? And that's where you've put the letting go. The letting go is not part of the educational process. You can't educate yourself to let go. The letting go happens in a different situation altogether. It's a recognition of what already is, and it's a letting go of the resistance to what is. And in that situation, whether you let go or not, doesn't change the situation. Gravity is, whether you acknowledge it or not. But when you acknowledge gravity, then gravity becomes an ally. When you don't acknowledge gravity, gravity is a drag.
So letting go is not even, in this framework, letting go is not even what you're doing. What you're really doing is just acknowledging and being aware. So you're not letting go of anything, really.
You're letting go of the attention you give to a particular perspective.
But then what's left? I feel like so much of my life is simply just built on this belief that if I can let go of a few of these habits, if I can get to this point, then all of a sudden I'm doing a good job. My life makes sense. But it's like, if I let go of that, then I don't know what direction I even go. Like, where do I go from here? Like, what do I do after I turn off this call?
Well, look, again, being clear about the direction that you're wanting to move into. Becoming more educated is a never-ending process.
Yeah.
Coming back home to who you are, in the sense that you come back to the original source of who you are. That original source of who you are, that dropping into is dropping not into an emotion, personal emotion. It's dropping into a universal experience of something, a universal experience of love, a universal experience of connection. a letting go into something which has already been there since day one and is fundamentally the nature of who you are. It's the place prior to the story that you've told yourself, that we tell ourselves about who we think we are. And not that that story is bad, and that story doesn't have its place and time in how we function. But it's a recognition that I am prior to this story. And my awareness of this story, my experience of this story, is coming from who I am. And in a certain way, I no longer relate to me being inside the story, trapped inside the story, trapped inside time, going from this point to this point where I'm halfway through my path and I want to get further and I don't want to get there, and all the dynamics of that story. I don't identify myself as being inside the story. I recognize that the story is inside of me. And the story is just a model on how I unfold my experience. And that actually who I fundamentally am is aware of the story. Who I fundamentally am predates the story, it contains the story.
You're larger than the story itself.
I'm larger than the story itself. Absolutely.
So in the metaphor of the branch, and what would the story be in that?
The story is the branch.
And it seems like the story, if I'm understanding right, the story is basically the entire collection of things that you tell yourself to make sense of everything. Like, this is who I am. This is what I want to be. I am brave. I am strong. Okay, this is what. Is that what the story is?
Yeah, it's the whole didactic. It's the whole narrative. And the thing is, if you look at the narrative, really, in person, your story is fundamentally a combination of your genetics, your education, your cultural conditioning, your sexuality, the whole dynamic that goes with that, right? And then you make that whole thing personalized. That's me. You make that personalized. But if that's truly you, then you would have to say that you chose all these things and you created all these things and you made all these things happen. And you didn't. You didn't choose to be born a man. You didn't choose to be born in the culture you were born in. You didn't choose to be educated at that early age in that way.
I didn't choose any of it, yeah.
You didn't choose any of it.
Yeah.
You didn't choose your genetics. You didn't choose your parents. It was all a gift. The story is an avatar. It's just an avatar in the way that it's a representation, an expression. It's a localization of your consciousness through a particular narrative. And that narrative is something that we've all inherited. We've all received. And it's fundamentally, and this is where it becomes quite interesting, it's fundamentally impersonal. The dynamics of your narrative and the dynamics of my narrative are made of the same material. Fear, hope, shame. I want to be a good person. I don't want to be a bad person. I want this. I want that. I want to honor these things. All these things are fundamentally the details of your life and the details of mine are different, no doubt. But the elements are the same, and they're all fundamentally impersonal. We can't even take credit. We can't even take credit for the fact that we inherit a whole language system, our whole conceptual framework, how we model the world. Everything is inherited. Everything. Yeah. All of that we think we are. It's just an inheritance.
Dang. I mean, this is the type of conversations that I want to have, because we have, this is why I got into this education field, because I had spent so much time hearing conversations about teacher pay and about type of curriculum and all things that are important, not to put down any of those conversations, but it felt like we were missing the fundamental point, like the most important questions, which is like, what is it that we're even trying to do? I mean,
Right.
what is an educated mind? What does that even look like outside of someone who's just capable of doing complex algorithms? And what outside of that, who do we deem to be educated and why? And it seems like some of the things that we're touching on here makes you have to reframe, okay, if this is what we were going to take is like, how would a schooling system even work around something like this? Because the entire structure, it's built on, okay, you go from this grade to this grade to this grade. You learn all these things because you need to get to this state where you're able to be competent and useful. It's not personal at all. I mean, there's no aspect of this that helps you understand. I mean, I keep bringing this. I didn't have a single class where we talked about death until I was 20 years old. That is mind-boggling to me. One of the most fundamental human experiences was never talked about. I mean, how are we even calling this an education? I mean, truly. And so, in some of the things that you're talking about, have you ever thought about what that would even look like in a schooling system? Is it even possible?
Well, there was a quote. I had a good friend, and we were both back in university when we were training. You're studying aeronautical engineering, and even at this level, and he had made a very interesting observation. He said, I realize that the university is not teaching us anything. It's training us to process information, so that we end up being able to do work later on. So we become good workers. We learn how to process information so we can get the results of that information. We're not really comprehending the information that we have. Comprehending the miracle of gravity. It's like a miracle, right? Gravity is a miracle. And the essential nature of how life organizes itself is a miracle, and how we align with that through chemistry, through engineering.
Each one of it is mind blowing. It's amazing.
Is a miracle. So to appreciate the miracle of it and to be able to grasp that at the level of yourself is to be in awe of that. And then there's the numbers, then there's the details, then there's the way to manipulate that. And to kind of make it into a mechanical mode and to process the mechanics of it, and just being able to process and manipulate the world through the mechanics does not mean that you have comprehended its true nature. And to comprehend its true nature allows for the mechanics to be appreciated for what they are.
I'm writing all this down. Yeah.
You're recording this.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I think that's funny.
These days, you could just get it transcribed by AI, and you got no problem.
The one thing I've learned is that if I want something to really plant its seed in my mind, I have to write it. Then it just it has this magic on just sticking in there. But if I will never remember just from listening. But that's funny though.
Sure.
I mean, wow.
So I think to answer your question more generally, I think education should facilitate the and you gave a word, competent. Obviously, competency is important. Education should increase the competency of the human individual, but in such a way that that individual stays authentic to themselves. And authentic to themselves, and authentic to the realization that they exist in the collective as well. They exist as an individual, and they exist in the collective. There's that African proverb phrase that I don't remember the source of it, but I like it so much. It's, I am because we are. And it's the realization that who I am is also based on the fact that we are. I can't exist independently of the collective. It's not possible. I am an expression of the collective. And at the same time, I'm unique. I'm an individual. I am an I and I am a we simultaneously. And in that, I find my my capacity to be authentic to myself and and true in my relationships with the world around. And I don't see them as being in opposition. It's not I versus we, but it's I as who I am is supported by the we, and as I am, I support them.
Okay, I have to get into this because, okay, this is so
Sure.
interesting because, you know, you watch movies like Castaway. We've watched, you know, there's this sense of, we read this book in high school. It was called, it's about these British boys who get stranded on an island. It's called, you know what I'm talking about by any chance? It was
Yeah. I do. It's I know exactly what you're referring to.
Piggy. There's a Piggy character.
Yeah. No, I yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying so hard to remember it. Yeah. But
right, yeah.
in that book, I remember, you know, I think a lot about now why the government chose specific books and why, you know, why do we actually read the books that we do? And I think the big lesson that it feels like that was coming from that book, which they then counter with books like 1984, was kind of this like anti-anarchy, you know, kind of attack on like, okay, if you were left to your own, especially as kids, you guys will cause chaos. It is important to have government and to have structures in place to make sure that like these things can function. I always had like an issue kind of with that point for some reason. It just didn't feel like that book particularly gave a good argument for why anarchy, you know, a system where there was anarchy wouldn't work. But I wanted to say this to say that when you watch movies like Castaway or Life of Pi, where these people happen to just go into an island and like figure out their life there, it feels like it is possible in some ways to do it all by yourself. But obviously, I mean, that's why I'm curious about this concept of like I as the we, like is but I guess you wouldn't have had the ability to think and to have learned how to use a knife and all the things without the we. I don't know. Yeah. What
I
do
mean,
you
it
think?
took it. Well, just to get back, the name of the book is Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies. Yes.
Yeah. The just by virtue of the fact that it took two people to come together in order for you to be born is a basic example of that you exist because of the collective. But not only that, we can't breathe without the collective nature that exists around us. We can't walk without the earth supplying us with gravity. We don't function through in our lives without somebody putting the effort into producing the food that we eat, and that food being supported by the sunlight and the water that nourishes that food. Our whole system is systemic. There's no way that we could remove ourselves from that systemic experience in order to be able to find out whether we could do it on our own. And I would just ask you to reflect right now. Is there one thing that you could say you've done completely and totally by yourself with no help from anyone or anything?
I mean, it would be impossible, right? Because you need to do it on...
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not even possible.
No, it's not possible. Our whole life is an expression of a systemic connection with the world around us.
Dang, yeah. Then where does this where does that even the kind of importance placed on that? I don't know if you kept up. Mike Tyson has recently said some really profound things. I don't know if you've seen any of it on the internet, but Mike Tyson...
I followed a little bit, sure.
Yeah, he had a big fight, and he said something so profound about legacy. And he had basically someone had asked him, like, how will this fight impact your legacy? And for someone that successful to then have said, legacy means nothing to me. Legacy is just another word for ego. At the end of the day, like, I understand that simply, like, it was kind of this idea of, like, I feel like so many people who are successful...
I get that. I get that, but I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you.
You don't agree with that?
No. I mean, your impact on the world, is your legacy. Your relationship to that impact is very good. Now, you can let go of your relationship to that impact. You can recognize it's impersonal. It's a gift. You know, it was a gift. It's a gift to do this podcast. It's a gift to do Aikido. It's a gift. It's a gift. It's a gift. But the footprints we leave behind, that's our legacy. Now, if I become hyper attached to those footprints and I create an identity around it, then my ego flourishes. Yes. When I recognize, no, this is an event passing through time, and I've just been lucky enough and grateful enough to be able to participate with it.
Yeah.
I'm responsible for it, but I don't take ownership of it.
Yes, I think from what I heard him say, that's kind of the message that I took from it. But I like what you say, because when people ask about legacy, I think they only really ask some particular few people, usually men, usually quite successful. They don't, this idea that everyone leaves behind a legacy, and a really profound and long-lasting legacy, simply just through the fact of acting on the world for so long, is a really nice statement, because I think then it makes everyone feel like, you know what? I too leave something behind. It's not reserved only to the few successful and few powerful. And I think even how you laid out the concept of it, but it was really nice to hear someone so successful say something like that, rather than to take on the approach of, I want to go down as the number one boxer and, blah, 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 blah. Like, to really just be like, hey, all of that stuff, at the end of the day, I too know that I will be dying, and I too will pass forward as well. It was really nice to hear.
Sure, I can resonate with that, and I can appreciate that, and at the same time, I think we do have impact on the world around us, and how that impact is reflected, and how that gets shared, and if we recognize our responsibility for the impact, then we become sensitive to what we leave behind. That doesn't mean we're perfect, but that just means we're conscious.
Being sensitive to what you leave behind. Yeah. I mean, this conversation, I don't want to take too much more of your time, but this conversation can go on for so long, because I think we're touching at the core of so much of what this podcast is even about. I mean, really touching on the core of what is a good life? What does that look like? And then from that aim, how do we then go to what does a good education look like? And I think a lot of what we talked about here, I mean, even reframing this concept of letting go, talking about what it means to be a human in accordance with nature, and to talk about, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. And we didn't get much into the Aikido, but actually I do feel like we dropped into the essential nature. So,
yeah.
That's nice. And thank you very much for your questions, because they're very compelling. And I appreciate very much the opportunity to share these things, as it's not a common thing to discuss.
Yeah. And so if someone wants to learn more about your work, or even reach out and maybe do some work with you, where can they find you?
They can contact me at aikidomontreux.com. So that's AIKIDOMONTRUEX. Actually, no, that's EUX, sorry. But
oh, no, the French. Okay, got it.
And that's something that you can get a hold of me easily. I'm also on social media and Facebook.
Great.
And my presence on Instagram is not so strong, but it's not that difficult if you Google me to figure it out. But,
lovely. And I'll be attaching your website and stuff to the link.
Sure.
So, yeah.
That'd be great. Okay.
Yeah. And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.